We had a great workshop here. Thanks to the folks at NIMBIOS and to my colleague Pam Morris, who's also here, who's a program director in molecular and cellular biosciences. This says funding opportunities in biology at NSF. So some people tell me there are none, so I guess we're done. Well, not really. There are a lot of funding opportunities in biology at NSF. You just have to look broadly, and that's the take-home message that I'll get to in a minute. First, let me tell you what I'm going to tell you, which is we're going to have a brief overview of NSF and how it's structured and how it works, a little bit of about how proposal writing works in 2015, and about the programs that we offer for funding. And then I'll say a few brief things about the President's 2016 budget request to Congress. In other words, the President's intent for NSF, which generally reflects what the foundation would like to do. It's a sort of a dialogue between those two. And then we're obviously constrained by what Congress decides to put into the budget and the President signs off as our appropriation. But that it does help set the tone. And then I'm happy to take any questions as well after giving you the update on the budget and especially the budget with respect to biology. Oops. Okay, so very briefly, NSF, believe it or not, is an independent federal agency. We're not part of the Department of Health and Human Services or Agriculture, or we were at one time sort of affiliated with Department of Interior. No longer. We're in what's called an independent agency. Last year, our budget was $7.3 billion. With a B, that makes us a very small agency in Washington terms. Compare that to, for example, NIH, where their budget is on the order of $35 billion a year. And don't forget, NSF funds lots of different things, not just biology. So I like to say that NIH gets, $35 billion to study one species, and NSF gets about a tenth of that, so about $700 million to study all the rest. So 11,000 awards from 48,000 proposals. That's about a 22% success rate, but that includes proposals that have a very high chance of success because they're for workshops like this or for other activities where we maintain a high success rate, like our doctoral dissertation improvement grant, as well as the regular research programs where the funding rates tend to be lower or effectively lower. NSF, believe it or not, supports 24% of all federally funded basic science in this country off of that $7.3 billion budget. And of the biology that's funded that's not medical, we support 2/3 of it. We have a staff of a little over 2,000, and about 200 are like Pam, rotators, who come from institutions like this one to work side by side with permanent folks like me. And so let me say right off the bat, if anybody's interested, and I'll say this at the end too, we're always actively recruiting colleagues to come and work side by side with us for a year or two at NSF and learn more about how we do things. And in the biology directorate, you're basically treated equally as the permanent folks. We work side by side together, and your title's exactly the same. This is the overall structure of NSF. We have 7 different science directorates: biology, computer science, education, human resources, engineering, geosciences, math and physical sciences. That includes like astronomy, physics, things like that, and then social, behavioral, and economic sciences. And so that's a lot of ground to cover. We also have some special offices and special things like the U.S. Antarctic program is run out of the Geosciences Directorate, and the UNOL shipping fleet that serves the marine research community is run by NSF. let's see, there we go. So this is what the biology directorate looks like. It's certainly one important source for funding in biology. It's not the only one at NSF, but it's an important one. We have 4 different divisions: biological infrastructure, environmental biology, integrative and organismal systems, and molecular and cellular biosciences. And below each of these are the clusters within each division. Sometimes a cluster is equivalent to a program. Sometimes a cluster may have several programs associated with it. I'm in the division of environmental biology, and I'm the lead in the ecosystem science cluster. So let's take a look at what that division looks like. So in the 4 clusters we have in DEB, these are all the different research areas that are supported. So, for example, the population community ecology cluster also is equivalent to its own program. And then the systematic and biodiversity sciences cluster has both a phylogenetic systematics program and a biodiversity discovery and analysis program. I'm in ecosystem science, so we have an ecosystem study program, and then we have these other opportunities. So all of these programs are part of what we call our core program solicitation. And I'll describe how that works in a minute, but they are programs that we envision them as long-term continuing programs. They do evolve over time, but they're our core programs where we basically get unsolicited proposals every year. There's no special call, there's just an annual call. These are our more special programs: long-term research in environmental biology, the LTER sites program, a network of 26 sites, and then these other special competitions, some of which I'll describe more later, are located in our division. And each of the other 3 divisions in biology similarly are structured. So this is just an example of one of those 4 divisions. We also have an Emerging Frontiers virtual division, and I'll say more again about that later. The other take-home message, though, is biology happens in a lot of places that are not in the biology directorate, but the biology directorate is kind of the root of the tree here. If Carl Woese were to design our programs, he might have put them in this fashion. And so, for example, in the Office of Polar Programs in Geosciences Directorate, we have Antarctic Organisms and Ecosystems and Arctic Natural Sciences. Also in Geosciences Directorate, there's the Geobiology Program and the Biological Oceanography Program. These programs also support a lot of biology research. In Engineering Directorate, we have the Environmental Engineering Program and the Environmental Sustainability Program. In the Biology Directorate, we have some special programs geared towards human resource development, everything from doctoral dissertation improvement grants to what replaced IGERT, now called the NSF Research Trainee Program. We have research experiences for undergraduates, the RU Sites Program, as well as you can get RU supplements to existing grants. We have a postdoctoral fellowship program that tends to target areas like underrepresented groups in science, for example. And then we have these special programs, some of which I mentioned. A very important one is the Faculty Early Career Program. That's a program for non-tenured but tenure-track faculty. They're 5-year grants. And if you're in that position or you're a postdoc and you think you're going to be getting a faculty job, you should take a really careful look at the NSF career program. It's a really important opportunity. And then a lot of other special opportunities, everything from ecology of infectious disease, to something that's going to be morphing this year into early neon research, our MacroSystem Biology program. So that's the message, is biology is happening in a lot of different places at NSF. Most of what you see here are actually not in the biology directorate. The previous slides dealt with the biology directorate itself. So how does the whole proposal system work at NSF? The National Science Board has dictated that we evaluate proposals on 2 criteria: intellectual merit and broader impacts. Intellectual merit seems rather straightforward: potential to advance knowledge, qualifications of the investigators, creativity and novelty, and access to resources. So is this a good idea? Can the people do it, and will it lead to good things? And then broader impacts, which is, I think, more difficult for people to wrap their heads around, can include everything from promoting teaching, training, and learning to broadening the participation of underrepresented groups in science. Can also include infrastructure improvements at institutions. So if your research is going to include the purchase of a piece of equipment, that's also going to be an important learning tool and add to the infrastructure of your university, or other researchers are also going to use it. Or other benefits of society. Sometimes people partner with natural history museums to set up exhibits, or national parks to do exhibits, or they partner with, they interact with, for example, state agency stakeholders to train people to take advantage of the science that is coming out of NSF research. So here's a few general tips in applying to NSF with a proposal. First of all, contact your program officer either via email or give us a call, or come see us. People come to see us. It makes a lasting impression, and when their proposals come up, you know, we've got some familiarity already with what they're going to propose, and we can give people feedback then before they actually send us their proposal. If you're going to send us a document, never make it more than 1 page, because we just don't have time to, you know, look at that more than that from everybody, and we want to give everybody a fair amount of attention. You need to read the solicitation if a special solicitation is involved, or read the grant program guide, the GPG. Really read the solicitation and the GPG. Also, it's very useful to, if you're wondering, you know, is this program appropriate for the project I have in mind? It's really useful to look at the award abstracts from things funded in that program in recent years to get a flavor for the kinds of people who are likely to be reviewing your proposal and whether or not it's a good fit, including talking again to the program officer. So what makes a proposal competitive? Sometimes people call up and they say, you know, is this a good project for your program? And what they really want me to say is, yes, we're going to fund that. And the NSF process involves a very intense review of ad hoc reviewers and panelist reviewers and discussion of program officers, and finally concurrence from a division director. So whenever anybody calls, you know, it's an idiosyncratic process that nobody can really predict in advance what's going to be funded, but we can tell you what properties are associated with ideas that tend to get funded. One is something of high impact, and something that's novel, that's unique and original. NSF in particular is attracted to something that's new and different. And that can be frustrating to people who have had funding for a while and have been productive and basically want to continue what they've been doing, and to reviewers and panelists that might look like just more of the same. So, but NSF's resources are limited, and that's where we tend to target our money. A common problem that people have with proposals, a common thing that causes proposals to die on the vine, is they come up with some great ideas and questions, but then their experiments don't actually address those questions. Okay, so that's something you can ask yourself is, okay, I know why this is important. Are the experiments I propose to do actually going to resolve that? That's a key thing. Obviously, the knowledge of your subject area is important, citing the right references, having sufficient experience or preliminary data that does show you're able to do what you're proposing to do. It shows the feasibility of it, and then sufficient detail to convince people you know what you're talking about. So this is the cycle for our core programs today in the division I'm in, environmental biology, and the division of integrative and organismal systems. It's slightly different for the other two divisions, but for now we'll just stick to this. We have a pre-proposal process. Everything starts with essentially a 5-page pre-proposal that then is reviewed only by panel, okay? And we aim to invite about 25% of the pre-proposals for full proposal submission. And that's sort of designed in a backwards way. Our idea is that given the numbers of pre-proposals we get, if we invite 25% of them, we hopefully will be able to fund 25% of the next group, okay? So 75% of the people are going to learn that they're not going to be writing a full proposal this year at this point. The full proposals then are invited and are submitted in August. I'll get to this information in a minute. And they're reviewed both by panels and usually by ad hoc reviewers as well. And then, as I mentioned, we try to support 25% of the full proposals. Now, if you're doing the math, 25% of 25% is actually only 5% of the ideas that were first submitted. So that's actually a really low rate, but it does save a lot of time and effort and work, right? If you're going to write a full proposal, you actually have a much better chance of getting funded than you did just a few years ago when our funding rates were less than 10%. So that was the idea behind this. I'll tell you a little more about the thinking behind it. We switched to the pre-proposal system because, first of all, the number of proposals had grown dramatically in the last 10 years coming into the biology directorate and particularly to these two divisions. This data is from Division of Environmental Biology. And since funding was pretty flat during those years, that meant that the success rate of proposals had gone, from about 25% overall to hedging towards 10%. And so that meant a lot of people were reviewing a lot of proposals that were not going to get funded. And that was a lot of work, which is the other reason why we did this, was the burden on the reviewer community. The amount of reviews that people were having to do back then was getting to the point where it was just oppressive, and they were reviewing things that were mostly going to be declined anyway. So that was another reason we went to this pre-proposal system. Now, the pre-proposal system is just for the core programs in DEB and iOS. Other proposals, like career proposals, OPUS proposals, which stands for Opportunities Promoting Synthesis, Research Coordination Network proposals, long-term research and environmental biology renewal proposals. These classes of proposals and many of the special competitions like Dimensions of Biodiversity or Genealogy of Life or MacroSystem Biology, they don't have a pre-proposal step. They're just, the same way NSF proposals used to be. You write your full proposal and it goes to panel and gets reviewed by ad hoc reviewers. But for the core programs, they go through this full proposal screening. To give you an idea, DEB gets over 1,400 pre-proposals a year. And so, that's a lot of panelists, a lot of review, but it's a lot of ad hoc reviews we don't do because we've streamlined the system in this way. Okay. Here's some tips about writing pre-proposals because they are a little different. In that case, you really don't have an opportunity to spend a lot of time going into the methods involved. It's selling people on an exciting idea, that's going to significantly advance the field in some way. And so you really have to capture the reader very quickly and get them excited about what you're doing. You have to make them feel like they wish they were going to grad school all over again just to work in your lab on this project. That's how excited it is. The ideas you're putting forward also have to be testable ideas. It can be, you may have identified something really exciting and important, but unless you at least sketch out how you're going to be able to address that, and it's in a testable fashion, then it'll be a problem. And then enough details have to be there so that people can see there's feasibility in what you're trying to do. Now, I'm going to go through some other aspects, at least in my division, that I think are helpful to know about when considering this whole pre-proposal, full proposal cycle, because I'm going to take a step back. One aspect of this whole pre-proposal system is if you're a new faculty member and you get your job and you're busy setting up your lab and you just decide, I'm not going to try and submit any pre-proposals for that first January date because I'm just getting my house in order, getting my lab set up, I'm going to be teaching soon. That means you're going to wait a whole nother year till you can submit a pre-proposal, and you won't even know if you're invited to submit a full proposal. If you don't get invited, you're going to wait yet another year again, okay, till you get the opportunity again to submit a pre-proposal. So the message I have for young faculty is start submitting as soon as you get the chance. Even if the ideas are a little rough, you want to get some of that experience in, and who knows, you might be invited the first round. But the other thing to consider is that there are a lot of other programs at NSF that support biology, and even within Biology Directorate, there are other options that I'm going to mention. So one is, when you submit your pre-proposal, you can designate it now as what we call a small grant, at least in DEB. And that means your budget is not going to be more than $150,000 if you're invited for full proposal. Now, I know a lot of people are thinking to themselves, well, $150,000, that isn't much money at all. But we've been told over the years by people who repeatedly had their full proposals decline that, if I just had a little bit of money, I could really do something with that. Yes, I'd like a big grant, but I'm afraid to ask for a little money. I'm afraid people won't take me seriously. So we instituted this system. About 10% of the proposals we get are designated as small grant proposals, and you just put SG in the beginning, and people will still expect that the question you're going to ask to be important, but they realize the amount of work you're going to get done will have to be adjusted, both in terms of the time you spend and the amount of resources you'll have. Another thing I mentioned are the career awards. If you're in the early stages of your career, you're in a tenure track position, you really ought to look carefully at the career opportunity now, especially because career proposals do not require going through that pre-proposal step. So if you send in a pre-proposal in January and you learn in April it's not going to be invited for a full proposal, in July you can still submit a career proposal, and that career proposal will go to the same panel that your full proposal would have gone to had it been invited. Now, there are special conditions about career proposals. These include that you have to have a a career development plan. You have to have a letter from your chair. In the bio-directorate, your budget has to be for a minimum of $500,000. All of them are for 5 years, so $500,000 actually isn't very much money for 5 years. We really do look for career proposals, sort of the seamless integration of the broader impacts, the training, education, and outreach with the research program. But I'd be happy to answer questions if people call or write and want to know about developing a career proposal, because I think as a young faculty it's really important to take advantage of that opportunity, and it especially gives you feedback in that critical first or second year. It gives you the opportunity to submit a full proposal and get your ideas fleshed out, even if your pre-proposal doesn't get invited. Other opportunities that people can think about, there are some high-risk, high-payoff ideas that fit what we call the eager or early concept exploratory grants for testing novel ideas that people might read in a regular panel and say, wow, if that were true, that would change everything. But how can we give them all this money, $1 million to pursue this? Because in the first year they might find out it's not true. And then where would they be? Well, this is meant to be an exploratory program to test exciting ideas, high payoff ideas in their early years, and grants for up to $300, although they're often for less than that, can be submitted as eager proposals. Before you do that, you should contact the Cognizant program director and talk to them about your idea, because they can give you a very good sense of whether you'd be wasting your time or not. We also have a mechanism called the rapid mechanism. So let's say, for example, there's a huge flood, God forbid, and it's going to have a drastic effect here in the Smoky Mountains and change the ecology dramatically, and people want to get out there right away and do some sampling and understand the effect of this flood process. We have these rapid grants that are often used for cases like that, for cases like responding to an oil spill or a fire, a large fire, things like that. A volcano, Mount St. Helens explodes, and you want to see what are the first plants to colonize after a volcanic eruption. That's the kind of thing the rapid mechanism is for. So I'm about to transition into talking about the budget. There's a lot of opportunities at NSF. I didn't describe in much detail, but does anybody have any questions before I go on about proposals, process? Yeah, go ahead. So in DEB, it's one source of money. And in fact, they're reviewed as at the same panels as full proposals. It's one pot of money. Some other parts of NSF do it differently. Other questions? Yeah, back there. I can't hear you. So it's about the same. We try to aim for the same acceptance rate as for our full proposal. So I'd say maybe the 15-20% range. Not quite 25%, but we actually like career proposals. We try and find a way to fund them. We try to get co-funding from partners. We like career proposals. Any other questions? Steve?
Matt, since you're talking about budgets, and you mentioned some sort of things you like to see in the body of the proposal earlier, are there things in the budgets that really kill people when you guys are reviewing them, or is that not something that would kill a proposal?
So in terms of funding, there is a bang for the buck phenomenon that, if I have two projects we're looking at funding and they seem to be of equal merit, but one costs twice as much as the other, let's say $800,000 versus $1.6 million. We're going to ask, is that $1.6 million project really worth twice as much? as that $800,000 project. So the more you can keep your budget numbers down, the better. But you do have to ask for what you really need. And the fact of the matter is, you know, the grants that I've managed in 16 years at NSF have ranged for between $5,000 for a special, you know, workshop type activity to help students get to a workshop, to $20 million over 5 years for a center. And we see everything in between. And really, there are some unique and very exciting things that are also expensive. So I wouldn't want to give you the impression that we never fund expensive things. But the expensive things are going to get that much more scrutiny. In terms of particular things you ask for in the budget, I mean, what you ask for has to be necessary to carry out the project. And, you know, so there have been times where I've actually purchased a boat as part of a project because the boat was intrinsic to the education and outreach activity they wanted to do. And when you looked at it, it actually wasn't that expensive when, you know, given that they were going to spend 5 years in the course of this NSF grant doing all these outreach activities. Renting a boat all those years would actually be more expensive. But I would say the other thing is budgets are negotiable. So once we decide to make an award for somebody, we contact the PIs and often ask them to renegotiate, usually downward, but not always. This round, I'm actually funding something where we increase the budget a little bit over what they asked. So, you know, the budget you put in your proposal would not be the final budget probably that you're awarded in the end. And NSF, the way NSF works is once you get your grant, you're actually given a lot of leeway in how you reapportion funds. You can't use funds for anything, but you know, let's say you had budgeted for a postdoc and you didn't get any good responses to your ad, but you have a great new graduate student you'd rather use the money for. You know, that you won't even need to ask NSF's permission to do that, as long as it's consistent with the goals of the project. Any other questions? Yeah.
For your DEB small grants, what's the typical number of years?
1 to 2 years. Yeah. It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to stretch it out much more than that. Any others? All right. We'll have time at the end for more questions. So this is NSF's request to Congress. It's the President's request to Congress for NSF. It's a 5.2% increase over the current year. So our budget would be $7.7 billion. And here's in the biology directorate what it would be used for. This is just to sort of give you an idea of what the biology directorate is trying to think about. It's not, you know, it's just a request. It's not an appropriation. We don't know what will happen, but these are some ideas. The biology directorate got a slight increase this year over last year, an $11 million increase, and we're due for another slight increase, a 16.9% increase in the request from the President. Here's where that increase would go. Most of it would go to our Emerging Frontiers division. Each of the divisions would see a minor increase as well in their core program budgets. So why would we see that increase in Emerging Frontiers? Emerging Frontiers is sort of our incubator where we're growing the new and exciting things that we're trying to do and that we want to highlight for Congress. So here's where the main body of that increase would go. A new initiative in synthetic biology across all of biology, but especially $2 million in the Emerging Frontiers for a special activity. Continuation of this brain research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies initiative that has been going on now for a couple of years. That would increase by over $5 million. And then we asked for more money for our MacroSystems Biology program, which we're in the process of sort of morphing into the early NEON research program. So NEON is something I'll tell you about again in a minute. And actually, here it is. The National Ecological Observatory Network is something that NSF has been working on building for over 15 years. And what it is a series of networked sites with the same infrastructure and the same capacities around the country to facilitate regional to continental scale ecological studies. So very large scale, continental scale ecological studies in an integrative way. It includes everything from towers that are measuring gas exchanges to soil samples and archiving of extracted DNA from soils, and monitoring of mammals and plants and insects and all kinds of different measurements. The key is the measurements are done at each site exactly the same, and a lot of samples are collected, and the data that's collected, it's already been started collecting. The data is made immediately available online for people to look at. So things like ecosystem productivity measurements and CO2 exchange measurements, things like that, are already online for the parts of NEON that are built. NEON will be completed. It's a several $100 million investment of NSF, and it'll be completed by 2017. But NEON is infrastructure, it's not research. And so we need a program that will support the research that people are going to do with this data. You need to pay the salaries of grad students and postdocs, and you can also propose to do experiments that will take other measurements that will be correlated with NEON scale measurements. So that's the idea. The MacroSystem Biology program was started about 4 years ago and is now in the future going to emphasize using NEON facilities as they come online. Okay, so this was started 4 years ago when NEON was just the building of NEON was just beginning, and people were using various other means and networks that exist, LTR sites and the like, DOE face sites, etc. But now NEON is coming online, and so this is going to emphasize now early NEON research at the regional continental scale. Addresses things, everything from climate, land use to invasive species ecology, and if you're interested at all, take a look in the award abstracts for MacroSystems Biology and see what kinds of things have been funded. About half of it is ecosystem science, and the rest are more population, community ecology, and evolutionary experiments as well. The brain initiative that we're increasing the investment in, I don't know a lot about. Personally, it's part of our integrative and organismal systems. But if you want to know more about it, this year they're planning to hold an ideas lab and additional activities for next year. If you have questions and you can't find the iOS people who can answer those, contact me and I'll find out who you need to talk to. An activity that's been going on also about 5 years is the BioMaps program, the interface of biology, math, and physical sciences and engineering. And this is a fairly large investment from NSF. There's not a program that you apply to, but your proposal, if it is relevant to this area, you can tell your program officer that, and there's a pool of money essentially that they can draw from to help support this kind of research. Pam's division, molecular and cellular biosciences, their molecular biophysics program and their synthetic and systems biology programs have had a lot of proposals that have been in this area, but even some of the in Division of Environmental Biology have made use of this too. It's things at the interface of biology and math, physics, or engineering. Synthetic biology is an emerging area. It's part of the PAM is in the cluster of systems and synthetic biology. This is something to keep an eye on. I'm not sure what new program initiatives we're going to have, but it's something we've said to Congress. It's an exciting area that actually stretches across all of biology, and you know, if you increase our budget in this area, there's a lot. I think the main area is going to be metabolic engineering. And then one other thing I haven't mentioned yet, the acronym is Infused, stands for the Innovations at the Nexus of Food, Energy, and Water. We had a Dear Colleague letter inviting workshop and eager proposals in this area, and it's going to be a major NSF-wide investment that especially is at the interface between biology and the geosciences and the social and economic sciences. Okay, so issues dealing with the nexus, food, water, and energy. And then finally, big data for bio. This is topic of the workshop we just held. There's a variety of different ways that NSF aims to support big data in biology, and that's the last component of the increase in budget in emerging frontiers. So the other thing I'd like to mention is about 3 years ago, my division, Environmental Biology, approached our lawyers and said, we want to do a blog. And they said, oh, no, you don't want to do that, you know, because, you know, nobody can really screen this before it goes out. You're going to have to respond to people. And say, no, we said, no, we really want to do a blog because we really want to be transparent. We want to tell people what's going on. We want to have that dialogue. So we actually convinced them to let us do the blog. It's the first blog at NSF. We call it DE Brief, okay, or debrief. And now all of the divisions in bio have a blog, and several other divisions outside of bio have created blogs as well. So these are really useful to look at questions about the details of funding trends, the comings and goings of program activities, and the reasons behind them. They go into a lot of detail. There's really a lot of useful, transparent information. We've got a lot of great positive feedback on these blogs. And then, let's see, finally, when you all get funded by NSF, we want to hear about your results. And so if you have an exciting finding coming out or a high visibility journal publication that is, you think it's worthy of a press release, don't wait until the day before it's published, but let your program officer know in advance that this is going to be happening, and we'll put our PR apparatus into action and set up an NSF press release too, because it's very important to let the public know the exciting results of successful NSF projects and results. And frankly, there's a lot more discoveries that happen than we can write PR releases for, but many of them we don't find out about until after the fact. So make sure you tell your program director. And then finally, we need you. I mentioned that we have a lot of rotators at NSF. We have rotator program directors and rotator division directors. In fact, many of the division directors and all of the assistant directors for biology, for all the directorates, all the senior administrators at NSF, really even the director of NSF is a rotator, is not a permanent person. The director's appointment is usually for 6 years at a time, whereas my appointment is in perpetuity until I retire. So we thrive by having scientists come from universities like this to work side by side with us on our programs, and especially those, you know, I mean, I've been in NSF for 15 years, as you heard, and so, you know, there's a lot of things at the bench and, you know, in the software that I don't know how to do and can't interpret as well as a colleague who's just come, you know, from a university where they have several projects going. So we really benefit from that, working side by side. We're the only agency that uses so many rotators. We also need your help in reviewing proposals as ad hoc mail reviewers and in serving on NSF panels. And so if you're interested in doing that, you know, send me an email at mkane@nsf.gov with your CV, and I'll do what I can to see that that CV gets the appropriate program and that they are able to put you to work reviewing for NSF or serving on a panel. So I think that's it. Any questions? Thanks. Frank?
In what capacity do you coordinate these efforts with other federal agencies like DOE, DOD?
So it varies from time to time. We have different intergovernmental agency working groups that we serve on, and we do try and coordinate things. We occasionally even collaborate. Several of the programs I had up there are joint programs with NIH, like the Ecology and Evolution of Infectious Disease and International Cooperative Biodiversity Groups, two examples where we collaborate with the Fogarty International Center of NIH. We've collaborated at various times with the USDA. We had a USDA program director here. And we try and keep in touch with our colleagues at DOE. Joe Graber and I got our PhDs in the same lab and have known each other, and Dan Drell is a good friend of mine over at DOE. So we try. We don't always get it right, but we try. You know, we also don't want to look like we're working too closely together to the point where it looks like we're the same. Okay, we like to be complementary but not duplicative in what we do. So I guess the other thing, though, is my hunch is, you know, there's enough unfunded great biology and great science right now that overlap isn't a big concern of mine, you know. So
there's a lot of students in the audience and younger scientists, and with your NSF needs you, that to me really screams out to the sort of long in the tooth, bald in the head scientists like myself. Are there programs there for younger people to get involved? I know when I'm at NSF reviewing, there's always interns running around and stuff like that. Could you comment on that?
So the main connection we have fellowship programs, research, graduate student fellowships that are run out of our Education and Human Resources Directorate. We also have the Doctoral Dissertation Improvement Grant opportunity for graduate students in my division. And then the kinds of jobs we have for people who don't have PhDs yet are more on the administrative technical level. So we have program technical analysts who work with us to analyze our portfolios and how we're making investments and things like that. They tend not to get involved in the actual review process. We used to have positions called science assistants, but that's essentially what a lot of those positions are. And then we have interns work with us in the summer from, for example, the Hispanic American Community HACU organization, Hispanic American Colleges and Universities, and we have another thing called Stay in School interns that come work with us. So there are a variety of internships. Most of them, to be honest, are geared towards kids going to college in the DC area so that they can continue staying in school and work with us. But we do have some summer opportunities. If anybody's interested, send me an email at mkane, M-K-A-N-E, at nsf.gov, and I'll get your inquiry to the appropriate source. Terry. So we're at a very, so Terry's question, if you didn't hear it, is how is NSF's budget going to look in the next couple of years? Well, in my mind, we're at a very unpredictable time, right? Because the Republicans actually, the majority in Congress, the House proposed an increase to NSF, but they wanted to move money around a lot. So they actually wanted to give more money to the biology directorate, but they wanted to take it from the geosciences directorate because geosciences funds climate change research. And they wanted to take it from the behavioral economic sciences directorate because they don't like social science. Meanwhile, the Senate, wanted to give us an increase but didn't want to move the money around. President wants to give us an increase, and he's, in line with the initiatives I described to you. And we've got a big election year coming up. And so, I mean, the one thing I'll say is, knock on wood, NSF has never had a major budget cut. We've had flat funding. We've had a little bit cut. Mostly we've had increases. In the Rita Caldwell years, NSF's budget over 6 years increased by almost 70%. So I think the bottom line is NSF is not a management organization like the EPA, for example. And we don't have our own labs like NIH or the USDA. We simply try and provide the resources for innovation and discovery, and we like the case that leads to increased economic prosperity in the country by making that investment. And so we're optimistic, but year to year, especially right now, it's anybody's guess.